seen some orange caution cones out there in a couple of spots. We apparently have some sinkholes developing, and we've had one on the south side of the building for years, and we just keep throwing dirt in it, and it'll go away, and then it'll develop again. But since we don't know exactly what's going on, uh, we would suggest that you keep your kids away from those areas because we don't know if they're going to continue to collapse or what. The elders, we've got to get together and figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to get it checked out. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? We can start a cemetery. Okay. Are you volunteering me first, or is that? So, as just a word of caution, when earth starts falling out from under you for no reason, you just don't know how extensive it is. So, we need to all be careful on that. And the cones over here at the driveway, I have those at the farthest location I could see where dirt was missing. So if you stay outside those cones, you should be okay for now. But we got to get that checked out. Go around the room real quick on the update on those that are sick and injured, and we're glad to see Scott and his family here today visiting. Angel just told me that her dad had a follow-up visit after his prostate surgery, and the doctor was 95% sure that they got it all. Have follow-up tests later and all, of course. Sister Dot is not doing too good. She's weak. Immune system is gone from all the chemo and everything, and she has really got a bad case of bronchitis now on top of all that. So she's really having a rough time. So let's keep her in our thoughts and our prayers. Holly is still scheduled for surgery. Most of you know that she had broken a foot in an auto accident, and trying to walk on crutches with a bad back it just amplifies the situation. So keep her in our prayers. Charles is home. He has got a cold. On top of trying to take breathing treatments, he couldn't even finish his physical therapy. He's developed a cold, so he's having some real issues. Tina's just maybe a tad better. Terry had his infusion Friday, has to go back Tuesday. Tuesday's when they're going to do another CAT scan on you. Is that correct? Hope so. Okay. And yes, sir. Oh, yes. Rosie has surgery on Tuesday, also having a joint replaced, right? No? Oh, okay. Check on something there. Moody's are here. Look like they're feeling some better. Emma had a bad case of sinus and all, so glad to see them back. And if you haven't talked to Scott lately, he's back from his trip to France, his missionary trip. And I just asked him, I said, did you learn anything? And he just sort of said, a bunch. So might need to talk to him. Anybody else on the sick? Yes. Abby's home with another broken eardrum. Okay. And of course, Rick with his heart. Anybody else? Okay. That would make things a lot easier. Okay. Well, doctors know so much more today than they did 100 years ago. So, but yes, definitely. Brother Joel, would you lead us in a prayer with them before we begin our class? Yeah. As you know, I like to sort of set the stage of where we are when we start a conversation about the scripture. I believe that if you find things on a timeline and where you are, and we always say that you need to know who's speaking, who they're speaking to, and before you can know what's going on. Today we're supposed to be in John chapter 10, the first 21 verses of John chapter 10. But to give us a good idea of what's going on in John 10, we need to look back at John 9. If you recall, starting in verse 1 of John 9, Jesus, they come up on a man who had been blind from birth. And then his disciples ask him who sinned, he or his parents. And then as the story develops, he heals the man of his blindness. And then the ones in charge, the Pharisees at this point, start questioning his parents, and then they question him. And in essence, they come down accusing them of something that is not correct, and threatens his parents with casting them out of the synagogue if they don't answer. And they say, well, he's of age, ask him. So when they ask him, you can see where the confusion is, and it's the Pharisees. And the Pharisees believe at this point in history that they are the shepherds of the flock, the whole flock of Jerusalem, the Jews. So that's where we're going to start. But before we do that, Brother Joel, would you go back to Jeremiah 23:5? Jeremiah 23:5. And read that. Jeremiah 23:5.
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous man, and the king shall reign above him, and shall execute judgment, justice.
Okay. So as we know from our studies, there's no question that what's going to take place here is the prophecy or prediction of Christ coming. So if we go to chapter 9 of John, and we pick up in verse 39, which starts a paragraph, I think that will help us understand chapter 10 that much better. Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words, and said unto him, are we blind also? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin, but now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. Now, like I said, the Pharisees thought that they were the overseers of the group. And here, Jesus had said he had come to be the judge, and that there were some blind, and they asked, were they blind? And his comments there were, if you look at it one way, it could be a little confusing, because it says, if you were blind, you have no sin. Now, there's a lot of religious groups out there that take this to be that if one has never heard and doesn't know, that they're okay, which is not the way it goes. But if you look at it from the other way, who had this group of people that he is speaking to right now had the opportunity to learn about Jesus. And what happens to a group when they have the opportunity to learn and they hear, and yet they turn the blind eye? And that's what he's talking about here. Is in essence, he's saying to them, I've been here teaching. Y'all have had this opportunity. You've heard what I have to say. You don't believe it, you turn and go the other way. So your sin is still upon you. So But then when we get to chapter 10, now that you know the setting, that he is speaking into a group that is supposed to be the leaders, in chapter 1 of verse 10, he says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber." Now, if we skip down to verse 7 real quickly, we can see that Jesus said unto them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep." So what he is saying here in verse 1 is that there is only one way that you can enter this. The Pharisees, and he's speaking to the Pharisees who are trying to sort of circumvent that. And he says, the only way that you can come into this sheepfold is by me. I'm the door. If you look at it in the sense of the world today, how many people in the world today profess to be religious and yet want to find their own way? They want to circumvent what the Bible says because they say, I mean, you can point something out to them and they can read it for themselves, and then their follow-up comment is, "But I believe." What has your belief to do with anything if it is not based on fact? I can believe that the moon is going to turn blue tomorrow. Is it? Not by all the facts we know. So, yes, sir. Okay. Sounds better to me, but who are they trying to please? Themselves? Or are they trying to... When we come together to worship, who are we here to benefit? Who are we here to please? We benefit ourselves, but who are we here to please? Who are we here to obey? The only one that, the author, right? So if they try to get in any other way, they'll be a thief and a robber. Now, I find it interesting that they use two different words here, because most of us today, when we think of thief and robber, what do we think about? We think about it just being a one word, we use it interchangeably, don't we? But if you really think about it in legal terms, when people are charged with crimes, there is a distinct difference between thief and robber. What is a thief? Like a burglar? Done in secret, done by deceit. There you go. We have a prior police officer in our midst, so he can tell us exactly. So it's stolen without threat. And then on the other hand, the robber is the one that is the bold, give it to me or else. So stolen with intent to threat. I'm glad he's here and put it in the right language, but we get the point here. So he uses these words, and in essence, it doesn't matter then if somebody is trying to sneak in and change your way of doing things, or they come boldly in and making assertions and do it. Whichever way they come in, if it is not by the one approved door, they're a thief, a robber, and they're wrong. Questions, comments? In verse 2, but he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. In other words, those that come in lawfully are the shepherds. Verse 3 is also interesting. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name and leadeth them out. Let's break that verse down. Let's go to the first part. To him the porter openeth. What is a porter? A doorkeeper. Why would we be talking about a doorkeeper in verse 3? Okay. Again, if we put things back into where we are on the timeline, what is taking place and where is this taking place? And it's taking place uh, probably close to a temple, and the method that they used in the temple or around the temple, they would have their sheepfolds and they would be somebody in charge. When the legal owner of those sheep came to get one and sell to somebody else, then the porter would open the door and let the legal guy in, and he would transact the business, and they would go on about their business. So here we're looking at it, and when Jesus taught parables and taught, what did he always do? That they could most closely relate to. So here he's talking to the Pharisees right here, and they know what takes place at the temple area. So he's saying, all right, to him, and who's the him? The one that comes lawfully. To him, the door is open. Second part is sheep hear his voice. I have personally never been around a bunch of sheep. I grew up in a different part of the world. I grew up in North Alabama. Our mainstay up there, my folks, was hogs. And I do know that hogs are very smart. People think they're dumb, but hogs are very smart. And when they see you coming at certain times of the day, they're going to come run and meet you. Why? You got food. Your city slicker cousin can come and he can walk out there at that same time of day, and what are they going to do? They still going to be walling in the mud. Why? They don't know him. They don't know, but they know that if they see one that has been taking care of them, what's going to happen? Sheep are the same way, and we've gone over this in several other passages in the Bible, that the sheep, they know the voice of their owner, their caretaker, and they will follow that voice and ignore all others. So the sheep are going to hear that voice. And his own sheep, you see, those sheepfolds, they didn't have 100 sheepfolds for 100 different vendors. They'd put them all in one paddock. So when one guy came up, his sheep would go to him and the other sheep would ignore him. See? So that's what's been, and then when those sheep, his sheep came, then he would lead them out. So what does that tell us to do today? Who are we supposed to follow? If we're the sheep, who are we supposed to follow? Christ. There are many congregations of the Lord's church today where the sheep follow who? Preacher. And this is nothing new. There have been years, even when I was a youngster, if a preacher left and went to a congregation close by, it seemed like a certain part of the church or the congregation would follow the preacher instead of following the teaching, whether he left on good circumstances or bad. But in all circumstances, who is our one true leader? He says he's the door, but later on he also says he is the shepherd, the chief shepherd. So again, questions or comments as we go along? Brother Golden. What the what? The porter would represent, it was just his method of explaining to them how things would work. I suppose if you want to break it down into does the porter have any significance for us today? Everyone in this auditorium today is a porter to a door. It's up to us to teach and invite people in, right? It's up to us to keep out the unauthorized. And who's the unauthorized that we would be keeping out? False teachers. Yes, sir. Correct. As Brother Terry said, Peter calls Christ the great shepherd. Again, I think that verse just had to do with trying to explain to the Pharisees that he was talking to and using the example of how things work there. And verse 4 says, "And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice." If we want to break that down to today, who are the shepherds of a congregation today? Elders. If we put the elder in place of this here in verse 4, he goeth before them, sheep follow him. What does that mean to us today? What did the shepherd do for the sheep then, and what are the elders to do today? The shepherds not only provided food, they provided what? Protection, direction. And today, elders are responsible for what? Are they responsible for direction? Guidance? Are they responsible for protection? You need to be shaking your head this way. But the whole congregation is also responsible for each other's protection, because there's a lot of times where a member of the congregation will know something that's going on and the elders are clueless. I am not on Facebook. I am not on Twitter. So if some correspondence took place and a member of this congregation saw it on their Facebook page and know that it could lead to trouble, what is their responsibility? Ignore it or advise somebody so that it can be taken care of? Advise somebody, right? Brother Scott, you're back there and you've been through school now for several years, been on a mission trip. You have anything to add or subtract from what I'm saying? Oh, pretty straightforward, isn't it? Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As we get a little bit farther along, we're going to address that issue a little bit more. But in verse 5, he says, "A stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers." In other words, if we know Christ's voice through Scripture, we can automatically pinpoint a stranger. A stranger is one who is not teaching what we know to be true. And this is a sort of a sore spot with me because I've been a Christian over 50 years. I've seen it happen throughout my life that it doesn't take long for one wrong person to enter a good congregation and then that congregation go the wrong direction because there are so many people in that congregation that will not do their due diligence of reading and studying and knowing the truth, and will follow blindly a person that has some charisma, because they can make it sound so right, so good. So this is one area that all Christians need to be particularly keen on, and that is, if somebody says something, you need to check it out. What group in the Bible? The Bereans checked things out to see that what was said was right. Verse 6, this parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things were which he spake unto them. Now, as was said here, it seems pretty cut and dry. How can they not understand? What is there to not understand when it says that a person that comes in by the door, the legal entryway, is okay? Those that come in any other way are not okay. Sheep is going to follow their caretaker and not the stranger. What can muddle this up, Brother Joel?
Just talking to the Pharisees again, they were probably looking at him like they're probably saying, well, he's a stranger.
I understand what you're saying, but at that same point, the Pharisees were supposed to be very knowledgeable in the text. Where did Christ always go when he was talking to a group? To the Bible. He always took them to the Bible. So and he didn't say anything here that was strange or out of character with the Bible. Everything he said here was reinforcing what had already had been said. Brother Cox?
They took it physically, literally, but the implication was spiritual.
Right.
They didn't understand that. Or didn't want to.
I'm believing that the second part of your phrase is more accurate. And that was, if you didn't hear him, he said they didn't want to understand. My dad had a saying about people, and that is, don't waste your time on them. Their mind's made up. Don't confuse them with the facts. Here, Christ is sort of confusing the Pharisees with the facts. I mean, they knew the facts, but they, through tradition, they like to do things a different way. Yes, sir. It's amazing what a hardened heart can do to your hearing. Very good. Right. And we'd started out in Jeremiah talking about there was going to be somebody to come and judge. The people that were opened to it knew, even the Magi knew that Christ was coming. The Pharisees and certain of the priests didn't want it to be in their lifetime because they would lose power. So sort of gets in political. But in verse 7, then he said, I say unto you. Now here he starts explaining to them very simply what they said they hadn't understood. I am the door of the sheep. Today, who are the sheep? The church. Who is the door? Christ. How many times do we find out in Scripture that there's only one way in? Christ. Then he said, all that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. Now, there's going to be, in all situations, a few strays out there that's going to follow anybody and everybody. But, Brother Joel, if you don't mind, would you turn to Acts chapter 5 and read verse 36 and 37?
and many obeyed him were scattered and brought to naught.
Oh,
After this man rose up Judas Iscariot, the chief of the tax men, and drew away much to ask him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, withstood.
okay. So even during Christ's time here, he's pointing back that there have been others who profess to be me, but they're not. So the majority of the people didn't follow him, but some did. This brings up an interesting point to me that today, when you talk about a lot of people, or when a lot of people in the religious world uh, start talking about the Antichrist, what are they trying to say by the Antichrist? I'm sorry, but there's only one, singular, and he's yet to come. But not only here, he says there's been those before. Where else does he talk about there have been many? Matthew 20. In Matthew, he's talking about there's, so Antichrist, if you break that word down, just means what? Against Christ. And that could be anybody and everybody in multitudes. And again, then in verse 9, he says, I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. The go in and go out part, here he says that any man that shall be saved and he can go in and go out. What did the shepherd do during this time period? What would go in and go out mean? Let's take it back to the porter opening the door. They were in the protected area. Did they graze in that protected area? No. They had to be let in and let out of that area, and the shepherd went with them and took care of them while they were out in the field grazing. So here he's just, if we're breaking it down to spiritual terms, it just means that shepherds are tending the flock. You can go and you can come, be fed, be watched after, and that's all that means. Verse 10, the thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. Very simple. Our prior cop back there, did anybody ever break into a house that you investigated that wasn't there for some mischievous purpose? None that I've ever seen. None that I've ever read about. None that I've ever heard about. So, verse 11, I am the good shepherd. Now he changes tunes. He's not only the door, but he is the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. If we break that down into today's times, now we understand that back in those days that the shepherds would actually put themselves in harm's way to protect the flock. When I was growing up, I don't know if I ever put myself in harm's way, but there have been occasions where I had to go out and take care of critters that were trying to get to our property and kill our animals. And if I had not dispatched them, they would have taken care of our animals. If I had not had the proper equipment with me, they may have turned on me, but I'd never considered myself being in harm's way to do it. But we know that they did because they didn't have the implements that we had when I was growing up. They didn't have the firepower. They had swords, and they had to get much closer to the animals to kill them. And you see that with David, and he had killed what animals? A bear and a lion with a slingshot or with a short sword. We don't know, but he took care of it. And he was a shepherd. Where we get interesting here is when he's talking about the shepherd doing this. I'm going to read verse 12 and 13 and then tie it together. But he that is an hireling and not the shepherd, who owns the sheep, are not seen, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth, because he is an hireling, and careth not for the sheep. Put that in a spiritual context. Today, had you rather be sheep with someone who cared for you, not for money, but cared for you because they cared for you, or cared for you because they got paid to watch after you? This verse here says that a lot of that, if they're doing it for money, they're not very sincere in that they'll save their own lives before they take care of the sheep. If we put that into the sense of a congregation, there has been debate over the years, throughout the years, about should elders get paid. Elders should not get paid just to be elders. Now, if an elder has a different responsibility and has to do that full time versus just the elder part, then we're coming up to a different issue. There are many congregations of the Lord's church, and there's one in Huntsville, Alabama, that is large enough where an elder is paid, but he's not being paid to be an elder. He's being paid to oversee a mission work, because they collect and gather, and he goes out, gets donations from the medical community and all, and yearly they go to Belize and provide medical and dental care free of charge to anybody in need. If you think about it for a second, that is an awesome responsibility to take on, is to make sure that you get the supplies ready for a mission trip and everything has a good date on it. And it is a full-time work there. And then he is an elder, not on the side. Eldering is a full-time job too. But I think you see what I'm talking about. Brother Clunch, you had your hand going up.
I were a shepherd. I had 100 sheep. Either the sheep won't die or I'm going to die.
All right, let me turn it around on you then. If you didn't hear it, Brother Terry said that astounded him, because if he had 100 sheep and something was coming after them, he'd let the sheep go before he'd lose his life. If you knew for a fact that there was somebody coming in this door right now to harm anybody in here, would you sacrifice your life for that person? All of that is true, but I think the main message is, and it goes back to David killing the animals. He took care of them. But I think what he's just saying here is that the hireling, those that have no vested interest in, is not going to put themselves out the way as one with a vested interest. Can we phrase it that way and be okay? Yes, sir. Well, I go back to my military days and my military training, and there's several in here that have had some of that same training. When you go out, it's a brotherhood. Everybody takes care of everybody else. They do not think of themselves before they think of their their buddies. They will die to save their companions. And I sort of look at it that way. And the only reason that they're willing to do that is because of the bond that they have with them. Now, when I was active duty, there were several people that I wish, and I never did, but I was so glad that I did not have to be in that situation with them, because I'd probably had to toss a coin. But anyway, we're through verse 13, and I meant to get through verse 21, and Luke's already up to ring a bell, so let's see where we can get to before. Verse 14, again he repeats, I am the good shepherd and know my sheep and am known of mine. So Christ, God, knows all about us. The only way we're going to know about him in the same context here is to study the word, live it. Verse 15, and as the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. This he did. The sheep are the members of the church. Who did Christ lay down his life for? He laid his life down for the whole world, but only those are going to benefit that what? Know him and obey. Then he makes an interesting statement here in verse 16. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. What is going on here, Brother Golden? Absolutely. He's talking about the Gentiles, because what group is he specifically addressing right now? The Jews. And he's taught them this lesson, and then he says, there are other sheep, meaning those Gentiles out there. And all of that now is going to come down to what? One sheepfold. So there's not going to be the Jews and others. There's going to be the one group. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life that I might take it up again. That concludes the paragraph. And what is going on here is he's going to lay his life down. But what had he already told them in other verses in the Bible? He's going to pick it up again. How long was he going to be in the grave? 3 days. And they even chastised him about saying you're going to build a temple in 3 days. But what he had reference to was that he was the sacrificial lamb. He was going to lay down his life for the whole world, all sinners. And everybody that believed and obeyed, they would be one of the sheep. Didn't matter if they was Jew, Gentile, Greek, heathen, don't matter their background. If they obeyed, there's going to be his. Verse 18, no man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. This commandment have I received of my Father. In other words, when they came to get him, he could have very easily have avoided that. But that takes me back to the night in the Garden of Gethsemane. Did Christ in human form want to go to the cross and die that death? He prayed fervently. He was sweating blood. But what was his closing comment there? Thy will, meaning God's will. And he knew that it was something that he had to do. And he did it. He lay it down of his own accord, because at any point he could have saved his life. Thank you so much, we'll pick up there Wednesday night. Appreciate your comments and your attention.